Every parent knows the helpless rage of watching someone hurt their child. For Jesse Gaines, that moment comes when he sees his 12-year-old daughter Molly sitting alone on the porch of Tucker's general store, tears streaming down her face after another group of cowhands rode by, laughing and calling her names. Molly sits in the wooden wheelchair her father built with his own hands, waiting patiently like she does every day. But today, something is different. The men don't know that this quiet girl's father was once the most feared gunslinger in 3 territories. They see only a helpless child in a wheelchair. They don't see Jesse Gaines watching from the shadows, his jaw set with the kind of determination that once made grown men cross the street rather than face him. What happens when a father's love meets a legacy he tried to leave behind? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, a town that had grown up around the promise of silver and stayed for the stubborn hope of decent folk trying to make an honest living. Jesse Gaines guided his weathered wagon down the rutted road, the wooden wheels creaking a familiar rhythm that had become the soundtrack to his and Molly's weekly trips to town. Beside him, Molly sat straight-backed in her handmade wheelchair, a masterpiece of oak and leather that Jesse had crafted during the long winter months after the accident. Every joint was perfectly fitted, every curve smoothed by his calloused hands until it felt like an extension of her small body. The leather seat was soft as butter, dyed a warm brown that matched her eyes, and the wheels turned silent as whispers on well-oiled bearings. "Papa, Mrs. Henderson's got a washout early today," Molly observed, pointing toward the boarding house where white sheets flapped like surrender flags in the morning breeze. Her voice carried the careful precision of a child who had learned to find joy in small observations. Each detail of their weekly routine, a treasured constant in a world that had shifted beneath her feet 3 years ago. Jesse nodded, his massive frame dwarfing the wagon seat. At 6 feet 4 inches and built like the oak trees that dotted his ranch, he moved with the quiet grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. His hands, gentle now as they guided the reins, told stories of hard work, thick fingers scarred from barbed wire and forge work, palms calloused from rope and leather. But those same hands could fashion delicate hinges for a child's wheelchair or braid wildflowers into his daughter's hair with the patience of a saint. "Reckon she wants to beat the heat," he said, his voice carrying the slow cadence of a man who chose his words carefully. Smart woman, that Mrs. Henderson. The town of Copper Ridge stretched before them like a promise half-kept. Tucker's general store anchored the main street, its wide porch offering shade and gossip in equal measure. Across the way stood the Silver Dollar Saloon, its bat-wing doors already swinging with the day's first customers, ranch hands looking to wash the dust from their throats before heading back to work. The schoolhouse sat at the far end of town, a modest white building where Miss Patricia Winters taught reading and arithmetic to any child whose parents valued learning over immediate labor. Jesse pulled the wagon to a stop outside Tucker's, setting the brake with practiced efficiency. Henry Tucker emerged from the store's dim interior, wiping his hands on a stained apron. Tucker was a good man, the kind who extended credit during hard times and never mentioned it again, who kept peppermint sticks behind the counter for children whose parents had more pride than pennies. Morning. "Jesse, Miss Molly," Tucker called, his weathered face creasing into a genuine smile. "Got that special order of drawing paper you requested, young lady?" Molly's face lit up like sunrise. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Tucker. I've been practicing my horses, and Papa says they're getting better every day." "I'm sure they are," Tucker said, helping Jesse lift Molly's wheelchair from the wagon bed. The chair was surprisingly light, despite its sturdy construction, another testament to Jesse's craftsmanship. "Your papa's got good taste in art supplies, I'll give him that." As they settled Molly on the porch, Jesse caught sight of movement near the Silver Dollar. 3 men lounged against the hitching post, their clothes marking them as ranch hands from the Morrison spread. Cade Rivers stood tallest among them, a lean man with cruel eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently twisted into a sneer. His companions, Dutch Kellerman and a newer hand called Rake, followed his lead like hungry dogs waiting for scraps. Jesse had encountered their type before, men who mistook cruelty for strength, who found entertainment in the suffering of others. In his previous life, such men had learned quickly to give him a wide berth. Now, as a father trying to build a peaceful existence, he forced himself to look away. "Papa, are you coming in?" Molly asked, already wheeling herself toward the store's entrance. Tucker had built a small ramp years ago, not for Molly specifically, but for his aging mother, who had used a walking stick. It served Molly's needs perfectly. "In a moment, sweetheart." Just checking on the horses, but Jesse wasn't looking at the horses. His attention remained fixed on Cade Rivers, who had noticed Molly's arrival and was saying something to his companions that made them laugh. The kind of laughter that carried malice like a weapon. Jesse's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a small sign that would have warned wiser men to mind their business. Inside Tucker's store, Molly maneuvered her wheelchair between the narrow aisles with the skill of long practice. She loved the smell of this place, leather and tobacco, coffee beans and penny candy, the mustiness of fabric bolts, and the sharp scent of metal tools. It smelled like civilization, like community, like belonging. Miss Patricia Winters emerged from behind a display of ribbons, her arms full of school supplies. She was a woman of perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet strength that came from facing life's challenges without complaint. She had arrived in Copper Ridge 2 years ago to teach school, bringing with her a mysterious past and an unwavering dedication to her students. "Molly, how wonderful to see you. I was just telling Mr. Tucker that we need more drawing supplies for the school. Perhaps you could share some of your artistic wisdom with the younger children." Molly beamed. "I'd love that, Miss Winters. Papa says teaching others helps us learn too." "Your papa is a wise man," Patricia said, glancing toward the door where Jesse's imposing silhouette filled the frame. There was something about Jesse Gaines that she couldn't quite name, a quality that suggested depths beneath the surface of the quiet rancher. She had noticed how other men in town deferred to him despite his peaceful demeanor, how conversations quieted when he entered a room. Outside, Cade Rivers had pushed away from the hitching post and was swaggering toward the general store, his companions following. Jesse stepped smoothly into their path, his movement casual but somehow final. "Gentlemen," Jesse said, his voice carrying no threat, only a kind of immovable certainty. "Well, if it isn't the cripple's papa," Cade sneered, apparently forgetting that he stood 3 inches shorter than Jesse and 50 pounds lighter. "Heard you built that contraption yourself." Mighty touching. Jesse's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle redistribution of weight that suggested coiled energy. "My daughter's name is Molly. You do well to remember that." The words were spoken quietly, almost conversationally, but they carried weight that made Cade's companions take an involuntary step backward. Only Cade himself, too proud or too stupid to recognize danger, held his ground. "Oh, we know her name," Cade said. "Molly the cripple." Molly the... He never finished the sentence. Jesse's hand moved faster than thought, gripping Cade's shirt front and lifting him slightly off the ground. For a moment, the two men locked eyes, and Cade saw something in Jesse's gaze that made his bladder clench with sudden fear. Then, as quickly as it had happened, Jesse released him, smoothing Cade's shirt with gentle pats that somehow felt more threatening than violence. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Jesse said pleasantly. "Perfect weather for minding one's own business." He turned and walked into the store, leaving 3 shaken men to contemplate the wisdom of finding entertainment elsewhere. 3 days later, the incident that would change everything began with the simple act of a 12-year-old girl trying to enjoy the afternoon sunshine. Molly sat on the wide porch of Tucker's general store, her drawing book balanced on her lap, sketching the horses tied at the hitching posts across the street. Her pencil moved with careful precision, capturing the way the bay mare's tail swished at flies, the patient stance of the old gelding, the proud arch of the spotted pony's neck. Drawing had become her window to a world of movement she could no longer experience herself, each line a small act of communion with the life that flowed around her. The leather-bound drawing book had been her mother's, though Molly had no memory of Martha Gaines using it. Jessie had given it to her on her 9th birthday, along with a set of pencils he'd ordered special from Denver. The pages were thick and cream-colored, perfect for holding the weight of graphite and the dreams of a girl who saw beauty in everything from wildflowers to weathered fence posts. She was so absorbed in capturing the subtle shading around a horse's eye that she didn't notice Cade Rivers and his companions approaching until their shadows fell across her paper. "Well, looky here," Cade's voice dripped with false cheer. "It's little Molly playing pretend artist." Molly looked up, her heart immediately quickening. She had learned to read the signs. The particular swagger in Cade's walk, the mean glint in Dutch Kellerman's eyes, the way Rake hung back slightly, uncomfortable but too cowardly to object. She forced her voice to remain steady. "Good afternoon, Mr. Rivers, Mr. Kellerman, Mr. Rake." Her politeness seemed to irritate Cade. He stepped closer, looming over her chair. "What's that you're drawing there? Let me see." Before Molly could respond, he snatched the book from her lap. She reached for it instinctively, but Cade held it high above her head, grinning at her helplessness. "These are supposed to be horses." He laughed, flipping through the pages with deliberate carelessness. "They look more like cows with long faces. Or maybe pigs." "Yeah, that's it. A whole book of pig drawings? Please give it back," Molly said, her voice beginning to crack despite her efforts to stay calm. "It was my mother's." "Oh, it was Mama's," Dutch chimed in, emboldened by Cade's example. "Guess crazy runs in the family. First Mama dies from birthing a cripple, then the cripple thinks she can draw." The words hit Molly like physical blows. She had heard whispers about her birth, about the complications that had taken her mother's life and left her own legs useless, but no one had ever spoken them aloud with such casual cruelty. Cade continued flipping through the drawings, making exaggerated sounds of disgust. "This one's supposed to be what, a sunset? Looks like someone spilled paint. And this horse here has 5 legs. 5 legs! You can't even count right. My father says art is about seeing with your heart," Molly whispered, tears beginning to blur her vision. "Your father," Cade sneered. "That oversized fool who thinks he's better than the rest of us. Where is Daddy now, little girl? Can't protect his broken daughter every minute of the day." Without warning, he began tearing pages from the book. The sound of ripping paper was like screaming in Molly's ears. Each destroyed drawing represented hours of careful work, moments of joy and concentration that could never be recovered. "Stop," she cried, lunging forward in her chair and grabbing for the book. "Please stop." But Cade danced backward, continuing his systematic destruction. A drawing of prairie wildflowers fluttered to the dusty porch. A sketch of her father mending fence joined it. A careful study of cloud formations over the mountains was crumpled and tossed aside like garbage. "Cade, maybe we should—" Rake began nervously, glancing around the nearly empty street. "Shut up! Rake, this cripple needs to learn her place. Her and her high and mighty father both." Dutch grabbed the handles of Molly's wheelchair from behind. "Yeah, let's teach her some manners." Before Molly could react, he yanked her chair backward off the porch. The wheelchair tilted dangerously, and Molly gripped the armrests as her world pitched sideways. The chair toppled over, spilling her into the dirt road with a cry of pain and shock. Cade stood over her, holding the remains of her drawing book. With deliberate malice, he tore out the last few intact pages and scattered them like confetti. The wind caught some of the paper, sending her artwork tumbling down the street like tumbleweeds. "There," he said with satisfaction. "Now your pictures are as broken as you are." Molly lay in the dust, her dress torn and dirty, tears cutting clean tracks down her dusty cheeks. The overturned wheelchair lay beside her like a wounded animal, one wheel still spinning slowly in the afternoon air. She tried to gather the scattered drawings, but they were torn and trampled, some already blowing away beyond reach from across the street. Jesse Gaines emerged from the blacksmith's shop, where he had been discussing repairs to his wagon tongue. The scene before him registered in a single, terrible instant. His daughter on the ground, her wheelchair overturned. 3 men standing over her with expressions of satisfaction and contempt. Something fundamental shifted inside Jesse in that moment. The careful control he had maintained for 12 years, the gentle persona he had constructed, the peaceful man he had tried to become, all of it cracked like ice under pressure. His footsteps made no sound in the dust as he crossed the street, but somehow Cade sensed his approach and turned. The sneer on the young man's face faltered when he saw Jesse's expression. Well, Cade tried to bluster, but his voice came out smaller than intended. Here comes the hero, Daddy. Too bad you weren't quick enough to save your... Jesse's hand shot out not to strike, but to grip Cade's throat with precisely calibrated pressure, enough to stop the flow of words, not enough to cause permanent damage. At least not yet. Dutch, Jesse said quietly, not taking his eyes off Cade. Rake, walk away. Now. The 2 men didn't need to be told twice. They scattered like leaves in a windstorm, leaving Cade alone with the consequences of his actions. Jesse lifted Cade slightly, bringing them eye to eye. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet certainty of winter and stone. You have 10 seconds to pick up every piece of my daughter's artwork you can find. Then you're going to help her back into her chair. Then you're going to apologize. And if I ever see you near her again, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. He released Cade, who stumbled backward, gasping and rubbing his throat. For a moment, the young cowhand looked as if he might try to salvage his pride with defiance. Then he looked into Jesse's eyes again and saw something that made him scramble to gather the scattered drawings with shaking hands. Molly watched from the ground, her pain momentarily forgotten in amazement at the transformation in her father. This wasn't the gentle rancher who taught her to whittle and sang her to sleep. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous and controlled and absolutely lethal in his quiet fury. After Cade had stammered through an apology and fled, Jesse knelt beside his daughter with infinite gentleness, checking her for injuries with hands that had been instruments of barely restrained violence just moments before. Are you hurt, sweetheart? Molly shook her head, though her scraped palms and the ache in her shoulder said otherwise. Papa, who were you just then? Jesse helped her back into her wheelchair, his movements careful and tender. But when he answered, his voice carried echoes of that other man, the one who had made Cade Rivers look like a frightened child. Just your father. Molly, just your father doing what fathers do. But as they rode home in silence, Molly clutched the torn remnants of her drawings and wondered what other secrets lived behind her father's gentle eyes. That evening, Jesse sat in his favorite chair by the fireplace, carefully mending what remained of Molly's drawings with paper, glue, and the infinite patience of a man who understood that some things once broken could never be quite the same, but that didn't mean they weren't worth saving. Molly had gone to bed early, exhausted by the day's trauma, but not before Jesse had noticed the way she kept glancing at him with new eyes, as if trying to reconcile the gentle father she knew with the man who had made Cade Rivers look like a scolded child. The torn pages lay spread across his kitchen table like the pieces of a puzzle, a drawing of storm clouds gathering over the mountains, carefully reassembled, a sketch of their old milk cow, Bessie, grazing in the south pasture. Page by page, he worked to restore what malice had destroyed, his large fingers surprisingly deft with the delicate paper. But as he worked, Jesse's mind wasn't on the drawings. It was on the choice that lay before him: continue to absorb these attacks in the name of peace, or take a more direct approach to ensuring they stopped permanently. The decision was easier than it should have been. 2 hours before dawn, Jesse saddled his horse and rode into town. The Silver Dollar Saloon never truly closed, and he knew that Cade and his companions would likely be there, celebrating their afternoon's work with whiskey and tall tales of their own courage. He was right. Jesse tied his horse at the rail and pushed through the batwing doors. The saloon was thick with smoke and the sour smell of men who worked hard and bathed rarely. A handful of oil lamps cast flickering shadows on the walls, and somewhere in the back, a piano player worked his way through a melancholy tune with more enthusiasm than skill. Cade sat at a corner table with Dutch and Rake, along with two other Morrison ranch hands Jesse didn't recognize. They were deep in their cups, voices loud with artificial bravado. "Should have seen her face when that wheelchair went over," Cade was saying, gesturing wildly with his whiskey glass, like a fish flopping on dry land. "And her daddy," Big Man thought he was so tough, but he didn't do nothing real. "Just grabbed my throat and made some threats," Dutch laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "Bet he goes home and cries himself to sleep, knowing he can't protect his crippled daughter from real men." Jesse stepped into their circle of lamplight like a shadow given substance. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I believe you were discussing my daughter." The effect was immediate and profound. Rake actually knocked over his chair, scrambling to his feet. One of the unknown ranch hands took one look at Jesse's face and decided he had urgent business elsewhere. Dutch's laughter died in his throat like a strangled bird. Only Cade held his ground, though Jesse noticed his hands trembling slightly as he set down his whiskey glass. Well, Cade managed, his voice trying for confidence and missing by miles. "Look who decided to grow some backbone. Come to finish what you started this afternoon." Jesse pulled out a chair and sat down at their table uninvited. The casual action somehow felt more threatening than any aggressive move would have been. "Actually," Jesse said, "I came to have a conversation about respect, about boundaries, about what happens to men who hurt children." As he spoke, Jesse's right hand moved to rest on the table, and something metallic caught the lamplight. It was a folded piece of paper, old, yellowed, and worn from handling. Without ceremony, Jesse unfolded it and smoothed it on the table between them. It was a wanted poster. The image was faded but unmistakably recognizable. A younger version of Jesse Gaines stared back at them from the paper. But it wasn't Jesse Gaines the poster was seeking. The name printed beneath the photograph read, "Jesse the Phantom McKenna," and the reward was $500 for information leading to his capture. Dead or alive. Dutch's face went white. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. Cade tried to maintain his bluster, but his voice cracked like a boy's. "This is supposed to scare us? Some old poster probably isn't even..." "You're right to be skeptical," Jesse said conversationally. "After all, wanted posters can be forged. Let me show you something that can't be." With movements too quick to follow, Jesse's hand moved to his belt and back to the table. Where his palm had been, a knife now stood embedded in the wooden surface, its blade quivering from the force of impact. The throw had been casual, almost lazy, but the blade had buried itself 3 inches deep in the hardwood. More importantly, it had split Cade's whiskey glass perfectly in half without spilling a drop of the amber liquid inside. The saloon had gone completely silent. Even the piano player had stopped mid-song. "Gentlemen," Jesse continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, "I want you to understand something. For 12 years I've been Jesse Gaines, rancher and father. Peaceful man. But before that I was someone else. Someone who solved problems differently." He gestured to the poster. "Jesse McKenna was wanted for robbery, murder, and conspiracy against the territorial government. What the poster doesn't say is that every one of those charges was false. I was working undercover for the U.S. Marshal Service, infiltrating outlaw gangs and gathering intelligence. The men I killed were killers themselves. The money I stole was already stolen from honest folks. And the conspiracy I was part of was designed to bring down some very dangerous people." Jesse pulled the knife from the table with a soft whisper of steel against wood. "But here's the thing about reputations. True or false, they tend to stick. And right now you boys are making me remember why mine was so useful." Cade's bravado finally crumbled completely. "Look, mister, we didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out," Jesse interrupted. "You saw a man trying to live peacefully and mistook that for weakness. You saw a child in a wheelchair and thought that made her fair game for your entertainment." He leaned forward slightly, and every man at the table instinctively leaned back. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay away from my daughter. Not just avoid her, I mean you're going to cross the street if you see her coming. You're going to tell every man on the Morrison ranch that Molly Gaines is under my protection, and anyone who bothers her will answer to me personally." Jesse stood, tucking the wanted poster back into his jacket. "And if I hear so much as a whisper that you've been talking about this conversation, or about what you think you know about my past, then we'll have another meeting. One that won't end with everyone walking away." He turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something. "Oh, and Cade, tomorrow you're going to Tucker's store. You're going to buy the finest set of drawing supplies they have, and you're going to have them delivered to my daughter with a written apology. Not because I'm making you, but because it's the right thing to do. And from now on, you're going to remember that doing the right thing is always an option, even when no one's watching." Jesse walked out of the saloon, leaving 5 shaken men to contemplate the difference between reputation and reality, and to wonder what other secrets lived quietly among their neighbors in the small town of Copper Ridge. The package arrived at Tucker's general store the next morning, delivered by a sheepish Cade Rivers, who couldn't meet anyone's eyes, and left without saying a word. Inside the brown paper wrapping lay the finest set of artists' supplies the store carried: pencils of varying hardness, charcoal sticks, a set of watercolor paints, and 3 leather-bound sketchbooks with thick, cream-colored pages. The accompanying note was brief and obviously written under duress. "Miss Molly, sorry about your drawings. Hope these help. C. Rivers." Henry Tucker chuckled as he examined the supplies. "Well, I'll be. Never thought I'd see the day Cade Rivers bought art supplies for anybody. Must have had quite a change of heart." But when Jesse came to collect the package, Tucker noticed something different in the big man's demeanor. There was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, a way of scanning the street that spoke of old habits reasserting themselves. That afternoon, Jesse sat with Molly on their front porch, watching her explore her new supplies with the focused intensity of a true artist. The wooden wedding ring he wore on a chain beneath his shirt, Martha's ring, the one he'd moved from his finger to his heart after her death, seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. "Papa," Molly said, testing a new pencil on the first page of her sketchbook, "why did Mr. Rivers buy me these things?" Jesse had been dreading this question. How could he explain that sometimes peace required the implicit threat of violence? That sometimes being a good father meant remembering how to be a dangerous man? Maybe he realized he was wrong, Jesse said carefully. "People can change, sweetheart. Sometimes they just need the right motivation." Molly looked up from her drawing, a careful study of a meadowlark perched on the porch railing. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, held depths that sometimes startled him. "Papa, tell me about Mama." The request caught Jesse off guard. Molly rarely asked about Martha directly, perhaps sensing that the subject carried pain too deep for casual conversation. Jesse fingered the chain at his throat, feeling the smooth gold of Martha's ring through his shirt. "What would you like to know? Was she brave?" The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. Jesse's mind drifted back 13 years, to a small house on the outskirts of Abilene, Kansas, where he had first met Martha Sullivan. He had been Jesse McKenna then, deep undercover with the Castellanos gang, tracking stolen army payroll across 3 territories. The gang had stopped in Abilene to resupply, and Jesse had volunteered for the mundane task of buying medical supplies, grateful for any excuse to be away from men whose casual cruelty made his skin crawl. Martha had been working as a nurse for the town doctor, a young woman with steady hands and kind eyes who didn't flinch when rough men tracked blood and violence into her domain. When Jesse walked into that makeshift clinic with a list of legitimate medical supplies and a heart full of secrets, she had looked at him with the sort of direct gaze that seemed to see straight through carefully constructed lies. "You're not like them," she had said quietly, checking over his list. "The men you ride with. You're different." It should have been alarming, his cover blown by a woman who'd known him for all of 10 minutes. Instead, it had been the first honest conversation he'd had in months. Was she brave? Jesse repeated his daughter's question, smiling at the memory. Your mother once stitched up a gunshot wound in a man's shoulder while his friends were shooting up the street outside. Never even flinched. When I asked her later how she stayed so calm, she said fear was a luxury she couldn't afford when people needed her help. Molly nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. I think I got some of her brave. I think you got more than your share, Jesse agreed. But that night, alone in his bedroom, Jesse allowed himself to remember the rest of the story. How Martha had helped him complete his mission, passing information to his handler through coded messages hidden in medical supply orders. How she had agreed to marry him despite knowing the dangerous life he led. How she had moved with him to Copper Ridge when his work with the Marshal Service ended, ready to build a new life with a man trying to leave his past behind. How she had died 3 days after Molly's birth, her body weakened by complications that the local doctor couldn't treat. How Jesse had held his newborn daughter and promised his dying wife that he would give up the gun forever, that their child would know only peace. How that promise was becoming harder to keep with each passing day. Jesse pulled a wooden box from beneath his bed, the same box he hadn't opened in 12 years. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay his gun belt and the matched pair of Colt 45s that had made Jesse McKenna a legend. The leather was still supple, the metal still bore its careful patina. Beneath the guns lay his marshal's badge, tarnished but unmistakably authentic. He lifted one of the pistols, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. His hand remembered the balance, the grip, the way the trigger responded to the slightest pressure. These guns had killed 16 men in his 5 years with the Marshal Service, all of them in fair fights, all of them men who had chosen violence over reason. But as Jesse held the weapon, it wasn't the faces of dead outlaws he saw. It was Molly, lying in the dust outside Tucker's store, her drawings scattered like fallen leaves. It was Cade Rivers' sneer as he destroyed something precious simply because he could. It was the look in his daughter's eyes when she asked if her mother had been brave. Jesse wrapped the guns carefully and returned them to their box. Not yet. The threat might be enough. The reputation might hold. But for the first time in 12 years, Jesse Gaines went to sleep with his gun belt within easy reach, and his dreams were filled with the echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. Outside, a late-season storm gathered over the mountains, bringing with it the promise of change and the scent of rain that had been too long in coming. In the morning, there would be new challenges, new tests of the peace Jesse had tried so hard to build. But tonight, in the small house he had built with his own hands for the daughter who carried her mother's courage in her heart, Jesse allowed himself to remember that some promises were harder to keep than others, and that sometimes the greatest act of love required the willingness to become, once again, the very thing you had sworn never to be. 3 weeks passed in deceptive calm. Cade Rivers and his companions gave Molly and Jesse a wide berth, crossing the street when they saw them coming, speaking in hushed tones when the Gaines name was mentioned. But Jesse, trained to read the signs of brewing trouble, noticed the way conversations stopped when he entered the Silver Dollar, the sideways glances that followed him down Main Street, the subtle shift in the town's atmosphere. It was during one of their quiet evenings together that Molly finally asked the question Jesse had been dreading. "Papa, why do people look at you differently now?" Jesse glanced up from the harness he was mending, his hands stilling on the leather. Molly sat in her wheelchair by the window, working on a drawing of the sunset painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The late light caught her profile, and for a moment she looked so much like Martha that Jesse's chest tightened. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Mr. Tucker tips his hat different now. Miss Winters gets nervous when you're around. And Mrs. Henderson actually stepped off the sidewalk yesterday when she saw you coming." Molly's pencil moved in careful strokes as she spoke, but Jesse could see the tension in her shoulders. "They used to just be friendly. Now they act like they're afraid." Jesse set down the harness and moved to the window beside her. The silver locket he had given her, the one containing Martha's photograph, caught the dying light as it rested against her dress. "Molly," he said carefully, What would you say if I told you that sometimes people we care about have parts of their life they don't talk about? Things they did before, maybe things they had to do. Molly's hand stilled on her drawing. I'd say I already figured that out. Papa, you're not exactly the kind of man who learned to throw knives from ranching. The observation was delivered with such matter-of-fact calm that Jesse almost smiled despite his concern. His daughter had inherited more than Martha's eyes. She had her mother's unnerving ability to see straight to the heart of things. What else have you figured out? He asked. That you're trying to protect me from something. That you changed your name, probably more than once. That the reason you never talk about your family is because you don't have any, or maybe because they think you're dead. Molly turned from her drawing to look directly at him. And that whatever you used to be, it was dangerous enough that even the mention of it makes grown men nervous. Jesse felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. You're 12 years old. You shouldn't have to think about such things. Maybe not, Molly agreed. But I do think about them, and Papa, I don't care what you used to be. You're my father. You built me this chair when I couldn't walk. You sing to me when I have nightmares. You spend hours helping me fix my drawings when mean people tear them up. Whatever else you might have been, you've always been good to me. The simple acceptance in her voice nearly undid Jesse completely. He reached out and touched her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. Your mother would be proud of you, he said quietly. Tell me about the locket, Molly said, her fingers moving to the silver oval at her throat. You gave it to me last month, but you never told me why. Jesse was quiet for so long that Molly wondered if he had heard her. Finally he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of old grief. I gave it to your mother the day I asked her to marry me. She wore it every day until the end. The photograph inside was taken on our wedding day. He paused, gathering himself. I wanted you to have it because she would have wanted you to carry a piece of her with you always. Molly opened the locket with careful fingers. The tiny photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Beside her stood a younger version of Jesse, clean-shaven and smiling with an openness that the years had tempered. She's beautiful, Molly whispered. She was, inside and out, and she had a strength that... Jesse's voice caught. She had a way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Like me with you? Molly asked softly. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with understanding beyond her years. Jesse realized that his daughter had already accepted the contradictions in his nature. The gentle father and the dangerous man. The peaceful rancher and whatever he had been before. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Jesse's hand moved instinctively toward his hip, a gesture that would have gone unnoticed by most. But Molly saw it and filed it away with all the other small signs that told her stories about her father's past. Through the window, they watched 3 riders approach the house. Jesse recognized them immediately. Buck Morrison, owner of the largest ranch in the territory, accompanied by 2 men Jesse didn't know, but whose bearing suggested they were comfortable with violence. Stay inside, Jesse told Molly, moving toward the door. Papa, stay inside, he repeated. More firmly this time, Jesse stepped onto the porch as the riders dismounted. Buck Morrison was a big man in his 50s, successful and used to getting his way. He owned most of the land between Copper Ridge and the territorial border, employed half the men in town, and had the kind of influence that came with money and the willingness to use it. Gains, Morrison said without preamble. We need to talk. Mr. Morrison, gentlemen. Jesse's voice was polite, but carried an undertone that made the 2 strangers shift uneasily in their saddles. My boys tell me you've been making threats, Morrison continued, intimidating good men who work for me. That true? Jesse considered his answer carefully. Through the window, he could see Molly watching, her face pale but determined. The wooden horse toy he had carved for her last Christmas sat on the windowsill beside her, a reminder of everything he was trying to protect. Your boys were bothering my daughter, Jesse said finally. I asked them to stop, politely. Morrison's laugh was harsh. Politely? Gade Rivers was so shaken he could barely work for a week. Dutch Kellerman won't even come to town anymore. What kind of politeness involves knife-throwing and death threats? The effective kind, Jesse replied calmly. The two strangers flanking Morrison exchanged glances. One of them, a lean man with pale eyes and a carefully groomed mustache, spoke for the first time. Mr. Gaines, my name is Vincent Shaw. I represent certain interests in Denver. Mr. Morrison has expressed concerns about your methods of conflict resolution. Perhaps we could discuss this like civilized men. Something in Shaw's tone made Jesse's attention sharpen. The man spoke with the careful precision of someone accustomed to making threats sound like invitations. I'm always willing to have a civilized conversation, Jesse said. As long as we understand that my daughter's welfare isn't up for negotiation, Shaw smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course not. But perhaps you should consider that a man with your particular history might want to be more careful about drawing attention to himself. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of implication in all directions. Jesse felt the familiar cold settle into his bones, the calculating calm that had once made him one of the most effective undercover operatives in the territory. I'm not sure what you mean, he said quietly. Oh, I think you do, Shaw replied. Jesse McKenna was quite famous once upon a time. Some people might be very interested to know that he's been living quietly in Copper Ridge all these years. From inside the house came the soft sound of Molly's wheelchair moving away from the window, and Jesse knew that his daughter had heard enough to understand that their peaceful life was about to change forever. The threat hung in the evening air like smoke from a distant fire. Jesse stood motionless on his porch, every instinct honed by years of danger, screaming warnings, while Buck Morrison and Vincent Shaw waited for his response. I think there's been some misunderstanding, Jesse said finally, his voice carrying the same conversational tone that had once made hardened outlaws nervous. I'm just a rancher trying to raise his daughter in peace. Shaw's smile widened. Of course you are. And we're just businessmen trying to maintain order in our community. But order requires that everyone understands their place, doesn't it? From inside the house, Jesse could hear Molly's wheelchair moving quietly across the floor. She was listening, as he had taught her to listen, not just to words, but to the spaces between them, the tensions that revealed more than any spoken threat. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Shaw? Jesse asked. Simple courtesy, Morrison interjected, his face red with the particular anger of a man unused to resistance. Your daughter needs to learn proper respect. Cade and the boys were just having some fun, and you turned it into something ugly. Made them look foolish. They made themselves look foolish, Jesse replied. I just pointed out the obvious. Shaw raised a hand, silencing Morrison before his anger could escalate further. Mr. Gaines, may I call you Jesse? I think we can reach an understanding. You continue your quiet life, raise your daughter, tend your ranch. In return, you remember that small communities depend on a certain flexibility when it comes to social interactions. You mean, I let your boys terrorize my daughter? Jesse translated. I mean, you recognize that children need to learn resilience, and that fathers who make too much noise about every small incident might find themselves facing larger problems. The wooden horse toy in the window caught the dying light. Its carefully carved features, a reminder of quiet evenings when Jesse's hands had shaped something beautiful instead of reaching for instruments of death. He thought of Molly's tears as she gathered her torn drawings, of the careful way she had rebuilt her confidence with new art supplies, of the trust in her eyes when she said she didn't care what he used to be. Gentlemen, Jesse said quietly, I appreciate you taking the time to ride out here and explain your position. Let me be equally clear about mine. My daughter is off limits, completely. Anyone who bothers her will answer to me, and that conversation won't be nearly as pleasant as this one. Shaw's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could handle this with words. We are handling it with words, Jesse said. These are my words. Stay away from my daughter. Morrison's face darkened further. You think you can threaten me? On my own land. I own half this county, Gaines. I can make life very difficult for you and your girl. Mr. Morrison, Jesse said, stepping down from the porch with the fluid grace of a man comfortable with violence. You can try. Something in his movement made Shaw's companions reach for their guns, a motion that stopped abruptly. When they found themselves staring down the barrel of a Colt .45 that had appeared in Jesse's hand faster than thought. Gentlemen, Jesse said conversationally, I wasn't threatening anyone, just stating facts. And here's another fact. You're on my land now making threats against my child. That gives me certain legal rights that I suggest you think carefully about before you do anything foolish. Shaw studied Jesse with new interest. Very impressive. But you can't outdraw 3 men forever, and you can't watch your daughter every moment of every day. You're right, Jesse agreed, not lowering his weapon. But I can make sure that anyone who hurts her pays a price that makes other people think twice about trying it. For a long moment, the 4 men stood frozen in tableau, Jesse with his gun drawn but not aimed, Shaw calculating odds and outcomes, Morrison red-faced with frustrated anger, and the 2 hired guns trying to decide if their pay was worth challenging a man who moved like death itself. Finally, Shaw nodded slowly. This conversation has been very educational. We'll be going now. But Mr. Gaines, Jesse, I hope you'll give some thought to what we've discussed. Small towns can be very unforgiving places for people who don't fit in. They mounted their horses and rode away, but not before Shaw turned back for one final comment. Oh, and Jesse, you might want to ask your daughter what she heard. Children have such good ears, don't they? After they were gone, Jesse stood alone on his porch for several minutes, watching the dust settle and listening to the familiar evening sounds of his ranch. When he finally went inside, he found Molly sitting at the kitchen table with her newest drawings spread before her, a detailed sketch of the wooden horse from her windowsill. How much did you hear? He asked gently. Enough, she said without looking up from her work. They want you to let them hurt me, so you won't cause trouble for them. That's not going to happen. I know. Molly's pencil moved in careful strokes, adding shadow and depth to the toy horse's carved mane. Papa, what's an undercover operative? The question stopped Jesse cold. Where did you hear that term? Miss Winters has been teaching us about different kinds of work people do. Law enforcement, military service, that sort of thing. She said some people work in secret to catch bad people, but they have to pretend to be bad themselves. Molly finally looked up at him. Is that what you used to do? Jesse sat down across from her, marveling again at his daughter's ability to piece together truths from fragments of information. Yes, he said simply. For 5 years, I worked for the U.S. Marshal Service. I pretended to be an outlaw so I could gather information about real criminals. Did you have to hurt people? Sometimes. Only when they were trying to hurt innocent people, and only when there was no other choice. Molly nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already concluded. And now those bad people want to use me to make you stop protecting other people. Something like that. That's not very smart of them, Molly observed, returning to her drawing. They obviously don't know you very well. Jesse reached across the table and touched her hand. Molly, things might get difficult. If you want, I could send you to stay with... No. The word was quiet but absolute. We're family, Papa. Families stick together. Especially when things get difficult. That night, after Molly had gone to bed, Jesse retrieved the wooden box from beneath his bed and laid out his gun belt on the kitchen table. The leather was still supple, the metal still gleamed with careful maintenance. He strapped the belt around his waist for the first time in 12 years, feeling the familiar weight settle against his hips. In the mirror above the kitchen basin, Jesse caught sight of his reflection and barely recognized the man looking back at him. The gentle rancher was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused, more dangerous. Someone who understood that peace was sometimes a luxury that good men couldn't afford. From her bedroom came the soft sound of Molly's breathing, peaceful and trusting. Jesse touched the wooden horse on the windowsill, a reminder of the man he had tried to become, and the child he would do anything to protect. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains. and Jesse Gaines began to prepare for a war he had hoped never to fight again. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous young man who wouldn't meet Jesse's eyes, and left before accepting the customary tip. Jesse read it twice before the full implications sank in, and when they did, he felt the last foundations of his carefully constructed peaceful life crumble beneath his feet. Marshall Gaines, stop. Vince Carver, escape territorial. Prison stop believed heading your direction, stop consider. Yourself warned, stop backup available if requested. Stop U.S. Marshal Thomas Bryant. Jesse stared at the yellow paper until the words blurred. Vince Carver. After all these years, the ghost of his past had finally tracked him down. Papa. Molly's voice came from behind him. Is everything all right? Jesse folded the telegram carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just ranch business. But as Molly went about her morning routine, Jesse's mind raced back 15 years to a different time, a different man, and the case that had defined his career as an undercover marshal. Vince Carver had been the leader of the most successful outlaw gang in the territory. Smart, charismatic, and utterly without conscience. For 3 years, the Carver gang had robbed banks, held up trains, and murdered anyone who got in their way, always staying one step ahead of the law. Jesse, then using the alias Jesse McKenna, had spent 8 months infiltrating the gang, earning Carver's trust through a carefully constructed history of manufactured crimes. He had ridden with them, planned with them, and gradually gathered the evidence needed to bring them all to justice. The final confrontation had come in a box canyon outside Durango, where Jesse had led the gang into a trap. In the ensuing gunfight, half the gang had died, and Vince Carver had taken 3 bullets before surrendering. Jesse's testimony had sent Carver to territorial prison for life, but apparently life sentences weren't as permanent as advertised. The sound of approaching horses interrupted Jesse's memories. He moved to the window, expecting to see Morrison's men again, but what he saw instead made his blood run cold. 5 riders approached the house, their leader a tall man with prematurely grey hair and eyes like winter ice, even 15 years older and bearing the marks of hard prison time. Vince Carver was unmistakable. Molly, Jesse said quietly, I need you to go to your room and stay there, no matter what you hear. Papa, now, sweetheart, please. Molly must have heard something in his voice, because she obeyed without further argument, wheeling herself quickly toward her bedroom. Jesse waited until he heard her door close, then stepped onto the porch. Carver dismounted slowly, his movements careful but still predatory. The years in prison had taken their toll. His face was gaunt, his hair thin, and his left shoulder sat higher than his right, probably from one of the bullets Jesse had put in him. But his eyes still held the same cold intelligence that had made him so dangerous. Well, Carver said, his voice carrying the hint of an educated accent that had always surprised people who expected outlaws to be crude and simple. Jesse McKenna, or should I say Marshal Jesse Gaines, you've done well for yourself out here. Nice ranch, pretty little town. I especially like the touch with the crippled daughter. Really sells the reformed man image. Jesse's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Carver raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. Easy there, old friend. I'm not here for violence. I'm here for a conversation. A business proposition, you might say. We have nothing to discuss, Carver. Oh, but we do. Carver gestured to his companions. Allow me to introduce my new associates. Some old friends from prison, some new acquisitions. All of them very interested in a certain bank in Silver Creek that's been accumulating a rather impressive amount of mining payroll. Jesse felt a chill of understanding. Silver Creek was 20 miles north, a growing mining town with minimal law enforcement. You want me to help you rob a bank? Not just any bank. This particular institution is expecting a shipment of $50,000 in gold coin next week. Money that could set a man up quite comfortably, especially if that man had spent 15 years in a territorial prison thinking about freedom and revenge. I'm not the same man you knew, Carver. I don't do that work anymore. Carver's laugh was like breaking glass. Oh, but you are exactly the same man. You see, I've been watching you, Jesse. I know about your little display with the knife in the saloon. I know about your conversation with Morrison's men. You can put on the costume of a peaceful rancher, but underneath, you're still the same cold-blooded killer who put 3 bullets in me and sent my friends to early graves. Jesse's jaw tightened. They were criminals, murderers. They chose their path. And now you get to choose yours. Carver's voice dropped to a whisper. Help me take that bank and I disappear forever. You'd never see me again, and your little girl gets to grow up with her loving father. Refuse and, well, accidents happen, don't they? Even to children in wheelchairs. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Jesse felt the familiar, a settle in his veins, the cold calculation that had once made him one of the most effective undercover operatives in the service. You're threatening my daughter. I'm offering you a choice. The same choice you offered me 15 years ago when you led my friends into that canyon to die. Except this time, you're the one with something to lose. From inside the house, Jesse could hear the soft sound of Molly's wheelchair. She was listening as he had taught her to listen, understanding as she always understood. When? Jesse asked quietly. Carver smiled, apparently mistaking Jesse's question for capitulation. Friday morning. The shipment arrives at 10. The bank opens at 11. By noon, we'll be $50,000 richer and riding hard for the Mexican border. And if I refuse, then your daughter has a very unfortunate accident. Maybe her wheelchair breaks while she's near the creek. Maybe a snake gets into her bedroom. Maybe she just disappears one day while you're out working the ranch. These things happen, Jesse. You of all people should know how dangerous the frontier can be. Jesse nodded slowly, as if considering the proposition. In truth, he was calculating angles, distances, and the fastest way to put 5 men in the ground without risking Molly's safety. I'll need time to think about it, he said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But remember, I'll be watching. And if you try anything heroic, if you send word to the authorities, if you do anything except show up Friday morning ready to work, your daughter pays the price. Carver remounted his horse, but before riding away, he pulled something from his saddlebag and tossed it onto the porch. It was Jesse's old marshal's badge, tarnished and bent but unmistakably authentic. Found this in the prison records, Carver said. Thought you might want it back. After all, you're going to need it where you're going. As the 5 riders disappeared into the distance, Jesse picked up the badge and turned it over in his hands. The metal was cold against his palm, heavy with the weight of old promises and abandoned ideals. From inside the house, Molly's voice called softly, "Papa, are you all right?" Jesse slipped the badge into his pocket beside the telegram and went to face his daughter, knowing that the peaceful life they had built together was about to end, and that the man who emerged from the coming storm might not be someone she could love. Wednesday evening found Jesse sitting at his kitchen table, cleaning his guns with the methodical precision of a man preparing for war. The matched Colts lay disassembled before him, each component gleaming in the lamplight as he worked. Molly sat across from him, ostensibly working on a drawing, but actually watching her father's hands move with practiced efficiency. "You're going to help them, aren't you?" she said quietly. Jesse's hands stilled on the gun barrel he was cleaning. "What makes you think that?" "Because you're cleaning your guns, and because you've been looking at me like you're trying to memorize my face." Molly set down her pencil and folded her hands in her lap. "And because that's what heroes do, they sacrifice themselves to protect the people they love." The simple statement hit Jesse harder than any of Carver's threats. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, seeing not just Martha's eyes and delicate features, but a strength of spirit that belonged entirely to Molly herself. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just a man trying to keep his daughter safe. Papa, may I tell you something?" Jesse nodded, continuing his methodical cleaning while she spoke. "I know you think I don't understand what's happening, but I do. That man, Mr. Carver, he wants you to help him steal money from innocent people. And he's threatening to hurt me if you don't." Molly's voice remained steady, but Jesse could see her hands trembling slightly. "But here's what I understand that maybe you don't. If you help him, you'll never forgive yourself. And if you never forgive yourself, Then he's won anyway. Jesse set down the gun barrel and looked at his daughter with something approaching awe. When had she become so wise? When had his little girl developed such clear insight into the complexities of moral choice? "Molly, if I don't help him, then we'll face whatever comes together," she interrupted. Like Mama would have done. Like families do. That night, after Molly had gone to bed, Jesse made two decisions that would determine the course of the next 48 hours. First, he composed a careful letter to Marshal Thomas Bryant, detailing Carver's plan and requesting immediate backup. The letter went into an envelope addressed to Henry Tucker, with instructions to deliver it to the territorial marshal if anything happened to Jesse or Molly. Second, he began to prepare for the possibility that help might not arrive in time. Jesse moved through his house with quiet efficiency, gathering supplies and making preparations. He loaded his spare ammunition into a leather pouch, checked the action on his rifle, and selected 3 knives from his collection, throwing blades balanced for accuracy and silence. But more importantly, he began to turn his ranch into a fortress, working by moonlight. Jesse positioned strategic barriers around the house, overturned feed troughs that could serve as cover. Hay bales arranged to create sightlines, loose boards removed from the barn loft to create firing positions. To a casual observer, the changes would look like routine maintenance. To someone with Jesse's training, they represented a carefully planned defensive position. Thursday morning brought unexpected visitors. Miss Patricia Winters arrived in the school's small buggy, accompanied by Henry Tucker. Both looked worried, and Jesse realized that his careful preparations might not have been as invisible as he'd hoped. "Jesse," Tucker said without preamble, "there's talk in town. Word is that some rough men have been asking questions about you and Molly. Figured you ought to know." Patricia stepped down from the buggy, with the careful grace of a woman unused to ranch life, but determined to adapt. "Mr. Gaines, I hope you don't mind my coming, but I'm concerned about Molly. She seemed distracted in school yesterday, and I noticed bruises on her arms." Jesse's blood went cold. "Bruises?" "Small ones on her wrists, like someone had grabbed her." Patricia's voice carried the controlled anger of a teacher who had seen too many children hurt by adults who should have protected them. "She said she fell from her chair, but you don't believe her," Jesse finished. "No, I don't, and neither do you." Jesse felt something dark and violent stir in his chest. If Carver had hurt Molly as a demonstration of his seriousness, where is she now? He asked. "In the house drawing," Tucker replied. "But Jesse, if someone's threatening your girl—" "Thank you for telling me," Jesse interrupted. "Both of you. But this is something I need to handle myself." Patricia stepped closer, and Jesse was surprised by the steel in her eyes. "Mr. Gaines, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but I want you to know that Molly has friends in this town. People who care about her. If you need help—" "I appreciate that," Jesse said sincerely. "More than you know. But the kind of help I need isn't something good people should be involved in." After they left, Jesse found Molly in her room, working on a drawing with unusual intensity. When she looked up, he could see the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "They came back," she said simply, "while you were working in the barn. 2 of them. They said they wanted to make sure I understood how serious they were." Jesse knelt beside her wheelchair, his hands gentle, but his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled fury. "Did they hurt you?" "They grabbed my wrists. Told me what would happen if you tried to be clever." Molly rolled up her sleeves, revealing the bruises Patricia had noticed. "They said you used to be good at staying alive, but that dead heroes don't protect anyone." Jesse closed his eyes, feeling the last restraints on his darker nature snap like old rope. When he opened them again, Molly gasped at what she saw there. "Papa!" "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I tried to keep this from you, tried to protect you from what I used to be. But they've forced my hand." Jesse stood and moved to the window, scanning the horizon with eyes that missed nothing. "Molly, I need you to listen very carefully. Tomorrow morning, you're going to town with Miss Winters. You're going to stay at the school, and you're not going to leave for any reason until I come for you." "What are you going to do?" Jesse turned back to his daughter, and for the first time in 12 years, He didn't try to hide the predator that lived behind his gentle facade. I'm going to remind some people why Jesse McKenna was a name that made grown men nervous. And then I'm going to make sure they never threaten my daughter again. That evening, as storm clouds gathered over the mountains, Jesse sat on his porch cleaning his guns one final time. The marshal's badge lay on the table beside him, its tarnished surface reflecting the dying light. Tomorrow he would pin it to his vest and ride into Silver Creek, not as Jesse Gaines the rancher, but as Marshal Jesse McKenna, a man who had spent 5 years walking among wolves and learning their language. Inside the house, Molly worked on her final drawing, a detailed portrait of her father as she had always seen him. Gentle hands building a wheelchair, patient voice teaching her to read, loving eyes that made her feel safe even when the world seemed dangerous. But as she drew, she wondered if the man who came home tomorrow would still be the father she remembered, or if the violence that was coming would change him into someone she didn't recognize. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains like the sound of approaching war. Friday morning dawned gray and cold, with storm clouds pressing down from the mountains like a lead blanket. Jesse stood on his porch at sunrise, watching Molly's small form disappear down the road toward town in Miss Winter's buggy. She had looked back once, and even at that distance, he could see the worry in her posture. The slingshot she had given him lay heavy in his pocket, a child's weapon crafted with surprising skill from oak and leather, complete with a pouch of smooth stones she had selected from the creek bed. "In case you need something quiet," she had said, pressing it into his hands before climbing into the buggy. Mama's Bible says David killed a giant with just a sling. Now, as Jesse strapped on his gun belt and pinned the marshal's badge to his vest, he wondered if his daughter understood better than he did what the coming day would require. The ride to Silver Creek took 2 hours through increasingly rough terrain. Jesse had chosen a route that would bring him into town from the east, allowing him to observe Carver's preparations before making his presence known. As he crested the final ridge, the mining town spread below him like a collection of children's blocks scattered in a valley. Silver Creek was bigger than Copper Ridge, but rougher around the edges. The main street was wider to accommodate the heavy ore wagons, and the buildings had the temporary look of structures built for profit rather than permanence. The bank sat at the center of town, a substantial brick building that represented stability in a place where fortunes rose and fell with the price of silver. Jesse dismounted and led his horse down the slope, every sense alert for signs of Carver's men. He found them quickly enough, too quickly. They weren't hiding their presence, which meant they either felt supremely confident or were walking into a trap themselves. Dutch Kellerman stood outside the general store, trying too hard to look casual while keeping watch on the bank. Rake lounged against a hitching post across the street, his nervous energy visible even from a distance. 2 men Jesse didn't recognize flanked the bank's entrance, their positioning too precise to be coincidental. But there was no sign of Carver himself, which meant the outlaw leader was either inside the bank already or waiting elsewhere for the robbery to begin. Jesse tied his horse to a rail 3 blocks from the bank and began walking toward the center of town, his spurs ringing against the wooden sidewalk with each step. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the morning quiet, and Jesse realized that was exactly what he wanted, to announce his presence and draw Carver's attention away from whatever backup plan the outlaw might have prepared. The effect was immediate. Dutch spotted him first, straightening with visible alarm before ducking into the general store. Rake pushed away from his hitching post and began walking quickly toward the bank. Within moments, a whistle echoed from somewhere near the livery stable, a signal that carried clearly in the still air. Jesse continued his deliberate pace down the main street, his hands loose at his sides, but ready to move faster than thought. The few early morning townspeople seemed to sense the tension, stepping quickly into doorways and watching from behind windows. When he was still 50 yards from the bank, Vince Carver emerged from the building's front entrance. The outlaw leader had abandoned any pretense of disguise. Wearing his gun belt openly and flanked by two hard-faced men Jesse recognized from wanted posters. Carver walked to the center of the street and stopped, his hands resting casually on his hips. "Marshal Gaines," Carver called, his voice carrying easily in the morning stillness. "How good of you to join us." "I was beginning to think you might disappoint me." Jesse stopped 30 yards away, the distance carefully chosen to provide maximum reaction time while remaining close enough for conversation. "Carver, I see you brought friends." "Insurance," Carver replied with his cold smile. "A man in my position can't be too careful, especially when dealing with someone who's made a career of betraying the trust of his associates." Around them, Jesse could sense movement as Carver's men took their positions. Dutch had reappeared on the porch of the general store, while Rake and another man flanked Jesse's position from the side streets. They had him surrounded, but Jesse had expected that. What he hadn't expected was the sound of his daughter's voice calling his name. "Papa!" Jesse's heart stopped as he turned to see Molly's wheelchair being pushed down the street by one of Carver's men. She was fighting against her captor's grip, her small hands clawing at the man's arms. But her efforts were futile against his superior strength. "Miss Winters tried to stop them," Molly called, her voice tight with fear but still strong. "I told her you would come for me." Carver's laugh was like breaking glass. "I'm sorry about the change in plans, Marshal, but I realized I needed better insurance than just threats. Your daughter will be staying with us during our business transaction. Consider her our guarantee of your cooperation." Jesse felt the familiar ice settle in his veins, but this time it was different. This time, the cold calculation was sharpened by a father's protective fury into something far more dangerous than mere professional competence. "Let her go, Carver. Our business is between you and me." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong," Carver replied, drawing his gun in a smooth motion that spoke of constant practice. "Our business involves everyone you care about. That's how these things work, Jesse. That's how you ensure cooperation." The outlaw's gun was pointed not at Jesse, but at Molly. "Now then," Carver continued, "shall we discuss the terms of your employment?" Time slowed to the crystalline clarity that Jesse remembered from his most dangerous moments as an undercover operative. Every detail became sharp and significant. The way Carver's finger rested on his trigger, the distance between Molly and her captor, the positioning of the other gunman around the street, the weight of the slingshot in his pocket. "Here's how this works," Carver continued, his gun steady on Molly. "You're going to walk into that bank with my associates and help them convince the manager to open the vault. You're going to use your famous reputation to ensure no one tries anything heroic. And when we're done, you're going to ride with us until we're safely across the border. And then," Jesse asked, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest, "then maybe your daughter gets to see her papa again. Or maybe she has an unfortunate accident during our journey. That depends entirely on how cooperative you are." Molly's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Papa, don't listen to him. He's lying. I heard them talking. They're planning to kill us both no matter what you do." The man holding her wheelchair cuffed her roughly across the head, making her cry out. The sound triggered something primal in Jesse, a protective instinct that burned away the last of his restraint. "That was a mistake," Jesse said quietly. Carver laughed. "What are you going to do, Marshal? Draw on 5 men while I have a gun pointed at your daughter?" Even the famous Jesse McKenna isn't that fast, but Jesse wasn't reaching for his guns. Instead, his hand moved to his pocket, fingers closing around the slingshot Molly had given him. In one fluid motion, he drew the weapon and sent a carefully aimed stone, whistling through the air. The projectile struck Carver's gun hand with the force of a hammer blow, sending his pistol spinning away across the dusty street. Before the outlaw could react, Jesse was moving, drawing both Colts in a motion so fast it seemed like magic. The first shot dropped Dutch Kellerman before the man could clear leather. The second put Rake on the ground, with a bullet through his shoulder. The third and fourth shots came so quickly they sounded like one, taking down Carver's flanking gunmen before they could bring their weapons to bear. But it was Molly who ended the fight as her captor fumbled for his gun with one hand while trying to control her wheelchair with the other. Molly pulled Martha's Bible from her lap, the heavy leather-bound book she had been clutching throughout her ordeal, and swung it with all her strength into the man's face. The blow sent him staggering backward, releasing his grip on her chair. Jesse's fifth shot took the man's center mass, dropping him beside Molly's wheelchair. In the sudden silence that followed, gunsmoke drifted through the morning air like incense, and the acrid smell of cordite mixed with the dusty scent of the street. Jesse stood motionless for a moment, his gun still drawn, scanning for additional threats. Carver lay on his back in the dirt, clutching his shattered hand and staring at Jesse with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You always were too clever for your own good," Carver gasped, blood seeping between his fingers. "But this isn't over. There are others, men who know where you live, who know about your daughter." Jesse holstered his weapons and walked to where Molly sat in her wheelchair, checking her for injuries with gentle hands. The bruise on her cheek where she'd been struck was already darkening, but her eyes were clear and determined. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" "No, Papa, but Miss Winters. They left her tied up in the schoolhouse. We need to help her." Jesse nodded, then turned back to Carver. The outlaw was trying to sit up, his face pale with blood loss, but his eyes still burning with malice. "You're going back to prison," Jesse said quietly. "And this time you're going to stay there. You think this ends it?" Carver snarled. "You think killing my men solves your problems? I sent word before we came here, Jesse. Word about the famous Marshal McKenna and his crippled daughter living quietly in Copper Ridge. There are bounty hunters coming, men who don't care about your badge or your reputation. They'll keep coming until—" Jesse's boot connected with Carver's jaw, cutting off the threat mid-sentence. The outlaw slumped unconscious in the dirt. Around them, the townspeople of Silver Creek began to emerge from their hiding places. The bank manager, a nervous man in a striped vest, approached cautiously, followed by several other townspeople who had witnessed the gunfight from behind windows and doorways. "Marshal, are you— that is, we heard gunshots and—" the bank manager stammered. "The threat's over," Jesse said, showing his badge. "You'll want to send for the territorial authorities to collect these men. And you might want to check your vault to make sure nothing was disturbed." A woman in a blue dress stepped forward, her face pale but her voice steady. "Marshal, there's a young lady tied up in the schoolhouse. The teacher, I think. These men left her there when they brought the girl here." Jesse felt a surge of guilt. In his focus on Molly's safety, he had almost forgotten about Patricia Winters. "Can someone see to her? Make sure she's not hurt?" "Already on it," said a tall man with a doctor's bag. "Dr. Harrison, I'll check on both ladies and tend to any wounds." As the immediate crisis passed, Jesse felt something fundamental shift inside him. The ice-cold calculation that had carried him through the gunfight was melting away, but it wasn't disappearing entirely. Instead, it was finding its proper place, not as his primary nature, but as a tool he could access when his family needed protection. He was still Jesse McKenna, the marshal who could outdraw 5 men and plan tactical operations with military precision. But he was also still Jesse Gaines, the father who carved wooden toys and sang lullabies and mended torn drawings with infinite patience. The two identities weren't in conflict anymore. They were complementary aspects of the same man. "Papa," Molly said softly, reaching for his hand. "What happens now?" Jesse knelt beside her wheelchair, his hands covering hers. The slingshot she had made lay in the dust nearby, having served its purpose with deadly accuracy. Martha's Bible remained in Molly's lap, its leather cover scratched but its pages intact. "Now we go home," he said, "and we figure out how to live with who we really are, all of who we are." The storm clouds that had been gathering all morning finally opened, sending fat raindrops drumming against the dusty street. The rain would wash away the blood and settle the dust. But Jesse knew that the events of this day would be remembered in Silver Creek for generations. As Dr. Harrison approached with Patricia Winters, who was shaken but unharmed, Jesse felt a profound sense of completion. The peaceful life he had tried to build in Copper Ridge hadn't been destroyed by the revelation of his past. It had been made stronger by the integration of all aspects of his identity. "Miss Winters," Jessie said as the teacher approached on unsteady legs, "I'm sorry you were caught up in this." Patricia's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was strong. "Don't apologize, Marshall. You did what needed to be done. And Molly—" She looked at the girl with something approaching awe. "And Molly was incredibly brave. She kept talking to me through the schoolhouse wall, telling me that her father would come for us, that everything would be all right." "I knew he would," Molly said simply. "That's what fathers do." As they prepared for the journey home, Jessie realized that the man who rode back to Copper Ridge would be different from the one who had left that morning. He would still be a father first, but he would no longer hide from the part of himself that made him capable of protecting his family and his community. The rain continued to fall as they loaded Carver and his surviving men into a wagon for transport to the territorial prison. Jessie's reputation had been fully revealed now. There would be no more secrets, no more careful hiding of his capabilities. But instead of feeling exposed and vulnerable, he felt liberated. Some secrets, he understood now, were meant to be buried, but others were meant to be worn openly, like a badge that declared to the world exactly who you were and what you stood for. As they began the journey home, with Molly's wheelchair secured in the back of a borrowed wagon and Patricia Winters riding beside them, Jessie allowed himself to hope that the worst of their troubles were behind them. Carver was finished, his gang destroyed, and Jessie's true identity was no longer a vulnerability to be exploited. They were going home not as fugitives from the past, but as a family ready to face whatever the future might bring. 6 months later, the new sign at the edge of Copper Ridge gleamed white in the afternoon sunshine. Copper Ridge, protected by Marshal Jesse Gaines. Below it, in smaller letters, someone had added, "Population 247, all welcome." Troublemakers discouraged, Jesse stood in the doorway of his office, the small building, beside Tucker's general store, that the town council had converted into a marshal's station, watching his daughter demonstrate her latest artistic technique to a group of younger children gathered on the store's front porch. "You have to look with your heart," Molly was explaining to 8-year-old Tommy Morrison, guiding his small hand as he attempted to sketch the old gelding tied at the hitching post. "Papa taught me that. Art isn't about making things look exactly right. It's about showing people how you see them." The afternoon art lessons had become a regular feature of life in Copper Ridge. Word of Molly's talent and patience as a teacher had spread throughout the territory, and parents often made special trips to town just so their children could spend time with the girl who had become something of a legend. She sat in her wheelchair like a young queen holding court, her voice gentle but authoritative as she guided eager young hands through the basics of proportion and shading. Buck Morrison sat nearby, his hat in his hands and his expression sheepish. The powerful rancher had become a different man since the events in Silver Creek, when news of Jessie's true identity and heroic past had spread through the territory like wildfire. The bullying his men had engaged in now seemed not just cruel, but profoundly stupid, like taunting a sleeping bear and being surprised when it showed its teeth. "Marshal Gaines," Morrison said as Jessie approached, "I wanted to thank you again for agreeing to teach Tommy, and to apologize again for water under the bridge, Buck." Jessie interrupted gently. "Your boy's got a good heart. He just needed someone to show him a different way to be strong." It was true. Young Tommy Morrison had become one of Molly's most devoted students, abandoning his father's crude attitudes in favor of the patient kindness he saw in the Gaines family. The transformation had been remarkable to watch. From a boy who had once participated in taunting Molly to a protective older brother figure who would fight anyone who said a harsh word about her. The change had gone a long way toward healing the rift between Jessie and the ranch owner. More importantly, it had shown the entire community that people could change, that past mistakes didn't have to define future behavior. Jesse had made that lesson the cornerstone of his approach as marshal. Firm justice tempered with the understanding that most people, given the right guidance and support, would choose to do better. Miss Patricia Winters emerged from the schoolhouse, carrying a bundle of papers and wearing the satisfied expression of a teacher whose students had exceeded expectations. She had become a frequent visitor to the Gaines ranch, ostensibly to discuss Molly's education, but increasingly for reasons that had little to do with academics. The relationship between her and Jesse had developed slowly, carefully, with both of them understanding that any future they might build together would have to include Molly not just as an addition, but as the foundation. "Jessie," she said, a slight flush coloring her cheeks, "I've graded the children's essays about local heroes. Would you like to see what they wrote about you?" Jesse shook his head with a smile. "I think I'd rather not know. Hero worship makes me nervous." "Good," Patricia laughed, "because half of them wrote about Molly instead. Apparently, a girl who can use a Bible as a weapon and teach art while sitting in a wheelchair is far more impressive than her gun-slinging father." The observation made Jesse's chest warm with pride. Molly had indeed become something of a legend in her own right, not just in Copper Ridge, but throughout the territory. Word of her courage during the Silver Creek incident had spread, and she had received letters from children as far away as Denver and Santa Fe, asking for advice on everything from dealing with bullies to pursuing artistic dreams despite physical limitations. Jesse had watched his daughter grow into her role as an inspiration to others with a mixture of pride and protective concern. She handled the attention with grace beyond her years, always deflecting praise to focus on the person asking for help. But sometimes, in quiet moments, he could see the weight of expectation in her young shoulders, and he worried about the burden of being seen as perfect by people who needed heroes. The afternoon crowd on the porch began to disperse as parents called their children home for evening chores. Tommy Morrison carefully rolled up his drawing, a surprisingly good sketch of the old gelding that showed real promise, and stood to leave. "Miss Molly," he said formally, "thank you for the lesson. I'll practice what you taught me about shadows." "You're very welcome, Tommy. Remember, practice makes progress, not perfection." Every artist was once an amateur. As the boy walked away with his father, Jesse marveled again at his daughter's wisdom. Where other children her age might have become arrogant or demanding from such attention, Molly had grown more thoughtful, more generous with her time and knowledge. Henry Tucker stepped out of his store, wiping his hands on his apron and nodding toward the marshal's office. "Who got a telegram for you, Jesse, from that Marshal Bryant fellow in the territorial capital." Jesse read the message twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket beside the letter he always carried. Molly's first attempt at writing her name, completed shortly after she learned to hold a pencil. "Good news?" Patricia asked, stepping closer with the natural intimacy of someone who had earned the right to share in family concerns. "Vince Carver's been transferred to the federal penitentiary in Kansas. Maximum security. They don't expect he'll be troubling anyone again." But Jesse didn't mention the rest of the telegram, the formal offer to return to active duty as a U.S. Marshal, working cases throughout the territory and beyond. It was a generous offer, one that would have appealed to the man he used to be. The work would be important, challenging, and well compensated. But Jesse Gaines had different priorities now. The irony wasn't lost on him that now, when his reputation could open any door in law enforcement, he was more committed than ever to staying in one place, protecting one small community, raising one remarkable daughter. As evening approached, Jesse and Molly made their way home, following the familiar path that led from town to their ranch. Patricia had accepted their invitation to dinner, a regular occurrence that spoke to the quiet courtship developing between the adults, conducted always with Molly's approval and input. Molly's wheelchair rolled smoothly over the packed earth, its wheels turning with the silent efficiency that spoke of Jesse's continued refinements to its design. He had become something of an expert in mechanical assistance devices, and other parents in the territory had begun writing to him for advice on caring for children with various physical challenges. "Papa," Molly said, as they crested the small hill that offered a view of their home. "Do you ever miss it?" The way things were before? Jesse considered the question carefully. Before could mean many things. Before Carver's return, before his identity was revealed, before Molly's accident, before Martha's death. All of those befores carried their own weight of loss and regret. "I miss your mother," he said finally.
"Every day."
"And I miss the simplicity of when you were smaller, when protecting you meant nothing more complicated than checking for monsters under your bed, but not the secrets." "No," Jesse said without hesitation. Not the secrets, it was true. The burden of hiding his past had been heavier than he had realized, affecting not just his relationship with Molly, but his ability to form connections with their community. Now, as Marshal Gaines, he was able to be fully himself, the gentle father and the capable lawman, the patient teacher and the dangerous protector when circumstances required it. The people of Copper Ridge had embraced both aspects of his identity, understanding that their safety depended not just on his willingness to face down troublemakers, but on his commitment to justice tempered with mercy. He had become not just their marshal, but their counselor, mediator, and sometimes confessor, roles that required all of his life experience to fulfill properly. They sat together on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Jesse of the first drawing Molly had ever shown him, a child's rendering of their home that had captured something essential about the place. Despite its technical imperfections, Patricia joined them with 3 cups of coffee, settling into the chair that had gradually become hers over the months of shared evenings. The 3 of them had developed an easy rhythm of companionship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "What do you see when you look at our life now?" Jesse asked, borrowing Molly's favorite question. Molly was quiet for a long moment, her artist's eye taking in the familiar details of their world, the carefully tended garden where Patricia had helped her plant flowers, the well-maintained barn where Jesse kept the horses that were increasingly his pride and joy, the distant mountains that stood like sentinels against the darkening sky. "I see a family," she said finally. "A real one. The kind where people know who they are and aren't afraid to show it. The kind where love is stronger than secrets and where being different doesn't make you less valuable." Patricia reached over and squeezed Molly's hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The relationship between the 2 women had developed into something deeper than teacher and student. They were kindred spirits who understood that strength came in many forms, that intelligence and compassion were as valuable as physical prowess. "I see possibility," Patricia added quietly. "I see people who've faced their worst fears and discovered they were stronger than they thought. I see a community that's learned to value character over reputation, courage over convention." Jesse reached over and squeezed both of their hands, marveling once again at the wisdom that lived in the women who shared his life. They were right, of course. They were a family, not the perfect, uncomplicated family he had once tried to create, but something more honest and perhaps more durable. "I love you both," he said, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I love you too, Papa," Molly replied. "All of you. Even the dangerous parts, especially the dangerous parts," Patricia added with a smile that made Jesse's heart race like a schoolboy's. "They're part of what makes you the man who can protect the people he loves." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jesse Gaines, rancher father Marshall, and perhaps soon to be husband again, sat with his family and contemplated the quiet miracle of a life built on truth instead of shadows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to be the man his family and community needed him to be. There would be disputes to mediate, troublemakers to discourage, and always the ongoing work of building a place where decent people could live in peace. But tonight, in the peaceful darkness of their front porch, with Molly's and Patricia's hands warm in his own, Jesse was exactly where he belonged. The man who had once lived by the gun had found something worth living for instead, not just the absence of violence, but the presence of love deep enough to make any sacrifice worthwhile. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound wild and free in the desert night. Jesse smiled, thinking that even the wildest things could find their place in the world, given time and the right circumstances. They were home, all of them. And that, Jesse understood now, was the greatest victory of all.